The Wiregrass Museum of Art created the Intergenerational Learning Project to give students like me the opportunity to learn from those in other generations. All of the people interviewed have one thing in common. They have risen above hardships and now have an informed and wise outlook on the past and our future. With each interview, we were presented with an opportunity to learn more about our world, our culture, and our local history. Now we present our conversations with you. Hello, I'm Anthony Thomas, a graduate of Headland High School, and today I'll be sitting down with civil rights leader and activist Ed Vaughn, who will discuss his upbringing and most importantly, what led him to where he is today.
My name is Edward Vaughn, and I am a native of Dothan, Alabama, but I was born in Abbeville, Alabama, which is about 30 miles north of Dothan, and I moved after I graduated from high school in Dothan, Carver High School, Dothan, 1951. I went to college a little after I was expelled from high school. I went to college for leading a strike. I went to college at Fisk University in Nashville, Tennessee, where I stayed there for 4 years. We had a very exciting time there and at Fisk University, and we led the early civil rights achievements in the city of Nashville. And we integrated the L&N Railroad under my leadership for 3 years as NAACP president, college president. When I left Fisk University, I went to law school at the University of Illinois at Champaign-Urbana. Stayed there a year. It was kind of taxing. And from there, I moved to Detroit, got married, and in Detroit, worked at several different jobs, ended up being elected to the Michigan House of Representatives after I served 10 years as the executive assistant to the first African-American mayor of Detroit, the Honorable Coleman A. Young. I worked for him for 10 years. After that, I served 4 terms in the Michigan House of Representatives, from where I retired. And so I came back home to take care of my mom, and my mom has passed. She lived to be 100, and I'm in Dothan now, and I'm nearing 100, so anyway, that's me, Edward Vaughn.
Okay, you mentioned in your introduction that you were expelled from high school.
Yes, I was expelled from high school because in 1951, the year I graduated, not long before graduation, and all of this can be verified in the Dothan Eagle, at least the strike can, but they don't tell exactly what actually went down. What happened is 2 Houston County health officials came to Carver High School. I was president of my junior class, and I was also president of my senior class. So this was my senior year, and of course all the seniors sat on the front row. And these 2 health officials from Houston County got up on the stage, 2 white health officials, and they accused the girls at Carver High School of giving venereal diseases to the soldiers at Camp Rucker, which is now Fort Rucker. And they kept talking and kept embarrassing our girls without any evidence of anything. And so we started mumbling and grumbling. And so my homeroom teacher, Mr. Dickerson, went up on stage and told them that, look, you can't come here and embarrass our girls like that. You have no proof, no evidence of any of this. And so you need to stop. And so they told him to get lost. And he instead decided to pick both of them up because he's a big fellow. He was a graduate of New York University, big fellow. He picked them both up and carried them out to Lake Street, and 1,000 kids are behind him. And he took them out, and the principal, Mr. Porter, he was scared to death. So oh, Mr. Dixon, please leave him alone, please leave him alone. Mr. Dixon took both of them out to Lake Street and threw them in the ditch. And the next day, Mr. Bruce Flurry, who was superintendent of schools, I was no school board, Mr. Flurry ran everything. He decided he was going to get rid of these upstart teachers from out of town with advanced college degrees. So he fired Mr. Dickerson and 4 other teachers. And Mr. and Mrs. Cater, he fired Mr. Hill and Montgomery. None of them had anything to do with the incident. But this was a good chance for him to fire teachers that he didn't want there. And so we went on strike. And I was a strike leader because I was the president of the senior class. And it was 100% effective because I went to the bottom, down in Baptist bottom, where all the boys hang out and drink. I used to hang out with them every night drinking. We decided that we weren't going to let nobody go to school. So I got the guys that didn't want to go to school, put them in the gateways to the school, and nobody went to school except one person. And that was my best friend, and his mother was a teacher, and the superintendent told her, if your son don't go to school, you are getting fired. So he came to me and begged me to let him go to school. And he thanked me for helping his mother keep her job. And so anyway, that was the strike in 1951 at Carver High School, Dothan. And I was expelled, and my transcript was not sent to Fisk University. It was holding my transcript. And so when the strike ended, they allowed me to get back into school. Then I went on to Fisk.
Growing up, did you always play that leader role?
Yes, I was. I'm a Leo. I was born July 30th, 1934.
August 1st, yeah.
And so I'm a Leo, and I've always been in leadership, and I've always been somehow in business, an entrepreneur, because all my relatives were entrepreneurs. My grandfather, my great uncle, they all were businessmen in Abbeville.
Coming from a family of leaders, was it hard for you to defeat the odds, or being that you already had examples of being successful in African American community, was it just something that you were determined to do, or was it still hard being
Well,
here in
for some reason, and I'm not so sure, it may have been because my grandfather, Frank White, who was a mulatto, his dad was a slave owner up in Barber County. And of course, because he looked like a white man, he worked uptown, Frank White, he worked uptown in Abbeville. And he used to hear about the whites who were going to go out. Henry County has had a terrible reputation for violence against blacks, and as evidenced by what has been done by Brian Stevenson in Montgomery in that situation. And Risa Taylor, the lady who was raped. All that happened in my hometown of Abbeville. And so it has always been a place like that. So my grandfather, Frank White, he spent his entire life finding out, because he was uptown with the whites, finding out what they were up to. And when he would find out that they were going to go out and lynch a black person, he would then get in his car. He always had a car. And he would drive out to their house and pick them up and bring them to Dothan. And they had a safe house in Dothan, run by Mr. E.B. Smart on South Foster Street. They would put him in the safe house, and they would wait until around 11 o'clock when the 58 ran. And the 58 was a train going north. And a lot of black folks got out of here on the 58. It would go from Dothan to Savannah to Washington, D.C., and up the coast. And when my grandfather would put them on the train and save them, they would get to New York, and my uncles and aunts, full of uncles and aunts in New York, they would find them jobs. So we had a network going that my grandfather was a part of. He had to get his own children out. My Uncle J.B. was kicked uptown when he was shining shoes. A white boy kicked him, and while Uncle J.B. was bent over on his shoe shine stand checking his polish and stuff, this white boy kicked him. So Uncle J.B. cold conked him in the back of his head with the Coca-Cola bottle. And so Granddaddy gave him a gun when he ran home, and Granddaddy gave him a gun and said, now, anybody try to stop you, he said, don't ask no question, don't answer no question, just start shooting. I meet you at Skipper Creek, and Skipper Creek was in back of the 40-some acres that my grandfather owned. He meet him at Skipper Creek, put him in his car, drive him to Dothan, put him in the safe house. So he had to get 2 or 3 of his own kids to New York the same way. So anyway, so I have quite a heritage of fighters. And I can name more of them. He wasn't the only one, but he was the most famous one. And he said he had one that he didn't save, and the guy believed his boss loved him, so he owed the boss some money. And he said, he ain't gonna bother me. He know I'm gonna pay him back. And he said, no, he said he was coming to kill you tonight. He was bringing a crowd out to kill you. And so the black guy said, he's not gonna bother me. And so anyway, uh, 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 Granddaddy Frank said that they came that night and they killed him because he wouldn't go with Granddaddy. Granddaddy tried to get him to go, but he wouldn't go. But anyway, that's the kind of family I come from. So they've been fighters. And you know, a lot of these things growing up, I didn't really know until later on. And my mom began to tell me the stories. And I would go to Abbeville. I would go to Abbeville every summer by myself. And I would live with my grandmother. That was Granddaddy Frank's mother. Her name was Ida Hogan's White. So everybody up there is kin to me just about it. You know, the black ones kin to me and the white ones kin to me. So anyway, we had a pretty extended family up there. So anyway, I would go up there and my grandmother had a sister who was a mulatto, and she had a white sister up there, and they used to get together from time to time at grandmother's house. There's two sisters, one black and one white. But anyway, that's how it was up in Henry County, you know. So, you know, that always, I mean, ever since the beginning of slavery, there's always been bedroom integration. So that was not an issue. Okay. That was a man named S.A. Cherry. His son has a law firm in Dothan now. Well, Mr. Cherry actually saved my life. Because I worked for him, S.A. Cherry. He was a city commissioner in Dothan, and he ran a grocery store called Cherry's Grocery Market on the corner of North Foster and Powell Street. And I delivered, and I was a grocery boy, you know, with them big baskets in the front, and I would deliver to different stores. And I delivered to a juke joint up in Midtown, which is called Dixie, which was all white at the time when I was growing up. It was all white, full of juke joints and the Dothan steam laundry and all that. And so I delivered some meat into this juke joint, which is now it's right on the corner of St. Andrews and Powell Street. And it's now an organization that helps families, poor families. Anyway, that was a juke joint when I was a kid growing up. And I walked in there with this meat and I put it in the box. And it was hot, I didn't take my cap off. I walked in the front door, put it in. Blacks had to go in the back door. On the back side of there was Headland Avenue. And so that's where blacks had to go in the back side. But because I was a grocery delivery guy, I went through the front door and I put it in. I had my cap on. And a guy called Dixie Slim, he was drunk and had a bunch of ladies around. This was all white place. And he told me to take my cap off. And I didn't. I heard him, but I didn't take my cap off. I was defiant. And so I walked out and got on my bicycle, went back to the store. And then I made a delivery, and then I came back, and he was in the store. And he called me the N-word, said, I told you to take that GD cap off. And then he took a swing at me. He swung around, and I ducked kindly. He knocked the cap off my head. And I started running, and Mr. Cherry grabbed him, S.A. Cherry. He grabbed him, and he told him, he said, he cussed him out. Because Cherry was tough, he cussed him out. Because he liked me. He and I were, he was sort of like a godfather figure to me. And he cussed the man out and told him that if he everybody respected Mr. Cherry up there. Because they knew he would wipe you out if you didn't give him the kind of respect he deserved. And he told me that black people had helped raise him and that he wasn't going to turn against us. And so he told that man not to ever bother me again, and the man didn't. The man could have very well have wiped me out and nobody would have even done anything to him. But I thank Mr. S.A. Cherry for doing that to me. And then I worked for Mr. Troy Lewis downtown Dothan. He helped me, told me that I should go to college. Troy Lewis Clothing used to be a men's clothing store on Foster Street. He was very helpful to me. I used to caddy for Sam Bloomberg. Sam was a good guy. I learned a lot at the country club because Sam and the Bloomberg store here in Dothan, they hired blacks as clerks. You know, they couldn't ring up the cash register, but no other stores in Dothan hired blacks as clerks except Bloomberg's, except one other store, Baxter's Shoe Store, which is now a restaurant on Foster Street. And that was a guy working there named Joe. And Joe was a black guy. He used to wait on everybody. But that was so unusual. But that's how Dothan was, because Dothan was a different kind of place. Every Thursday at 12 noon everything downtown. Forget about a circle, forget about a mall. Everything in downtown Dothan was shut down at 12 noon. And we would go, if we worked downtown, we'd be off, my mama would be off, everybody would be off. There was nothing open down there. And so the rich white folks would go play golf, and the poor black kids like me would go out and caddy for them. When I was growing up in Dothan, the Ku Klux Klan never came to Dothan. They couldn't come to Dothan. And the reason they couldn't come to Dothan is because you had two elements in Dothan that controlled Dothan economically. And that was the Jewish community and the white community. The Jewish community was headed up by the Bloombergs. And then Wallace Malone was the white guy who did the First National Bank. First National Bank is downtown Dothan is now the Cochran firm. That's where the First National Bank was. And right across the street was Bloomberg department store. So the two main characters in Dothan were Wallace Malone and Sam Bloomberg. And so Sam was a Jew. Wallace was Anglo-Saxon white. And so they had the money and they controlled Dothan. So they would not allow the Klan to come to Dothan. And because the Klan didn't like Jews either. They didn't like black folks, but they didn't like Jews either. So they could never operate in Dothan. And so what they did, they went to Cottonwood, and they're still in Cottonwood to this day. The Klan is still in Cottonwood, but the Klan could never have a meeting in Dothan. And at that time, you couldn't go to nobody's court and talk about, I want to get because, freedom of speech. They didn't go for stuff like that. I mean, the guys who ran the city. They didn't let them come to Dothan. So that was one of the things that we were spared about. But as a kid growing up, I would hear about lynchings all around Dothan, over in Georgia, and down in Florida Panhandle, lynchings, and up in Henry County where I was from. I mean, they'd be lynching black folks every day growing up. It would be a daily ritual of hearing about some black folks hung from some tree, burned to death, or flogged, but not in Dothan. So Dothan was different. And that's why Dothan could grow so well, because it started out as a trading community. And on Saturdays, this is where folks came to do their trading from Florida and Georgia, and they still do to this day. So. Of course, I wasn't here in 1938. I was, 4 years old. But Dr. George Washington Carver came to Detroit in 1938 to be the first speaker at the first Peanut Festival. And it was at Wiregrass Stadium, which is now where Wiregrass Park is over on 6th Avenue. But that was a stadium there. There's some tennis courts over there now, but that used to be Wiregrass Stadium. I used to go there and watch black baseball games. And I played football in high school, so we played our football games there because we didn't have anywhere at Carver to play except at the stadium. So anyway, Dr. Carver came to Dothan in 1938, and because he was black, he could not stay in any hotels here in Dothan. There were hotels, the Houston Hotel, which is where WTVY is now, and then the Martin Hotel, which was on Main Street, because none of those hotels were, and there were no other hotels to speak of around, but no white hotels would allow him to stay. So he stayed in the home of Miss Gussie McMillan, who was my first grade 2 teacher. And when I retired from the Michigan State Legislature and came back home, I bought her home, which is 702 East Newton Street. And that's where Dr. Carver stayed in 1938 when he came here to speak at the first Peanut Festival. Miss McMillan was a graduate of Tuskegee University, and it was Tuskegee Institute at that time. And so I bought that and turned it into a minor museum of African American history. So it's still in Dothan, and I got a bunch of stuff there. I got some really interesting things there. But that's where Dr. Carver stayed when he came to Dothan in 1938. Dr. Charles Wright, who was the owner of or was the founder of the largest museum of African American history in the world, which was the Wright Museum in Detroit, Michigan. Until the Smithsonian, it was the largest in the world, the Wright Museum. But Dr. Charles Wright was from Dothan, Alabama, born and raised on Pine Street, and went to Alabama State University. And from Alabama State University, he went to Meharry Medical College in Nashville, across the street from where I went to college at Fisk University. Dr. Charles Wright was a gynecologist in Detroit, and we were friends, but he was very interested in Black history. And he brought 200 or 300 Africans from the African continent to study medicine in America. And he made sure that they went back to Africa to practice medicine. He was a wonderful man. And everybody in Detroit knew Dr. Wright, but he had a little museum. When Mayor Young became mayor of Detroit, the first African-American mayor, and I told you I worked for him for 10 years, the mayor put me in charge of helping Dr. Wright build this museum from the mayor's office, because a lot of the money for the museum came through Coleman Young at the mayor's office. So I was very much involved with Dr. Wright. But he was from Dothan, Alabama. And he always told me, he said, Ed Vaughn, he said, I'll tell you what, because his dad was his dad was Reverend Wright, who had a laundromat on Range Street. Range and Newton had a laundromat in that little shopping plaza there. He told me, he said, Dr. Wright told me, he said, Ed, he said, if they ever pave Pine Street, he said, I'll come back to Dothan. Now, you know, when I was growing up in Dothan, in the 40s and the 50s, there were no streets in Dothan that Black people lived on that were paved. Not one. There was no paved street that Black people lived on in Dothan. And you know, when they decided many years later to pave these streets, I lived on the only paved street, and that was Newton Street. And it wasn't paved all the way. And the only reason they paved Newton Street was because of the Dothan Oil Mill Company that produced Domco cooking oil. So the big peanut trucks and cottonseed trucks to get into the oil mill. But he did come back to Dothan. He spoke at one of the North Island reunions, because he graduated from North Island School here in Dothan. And but anyway, he built that museum. He's deceased now. And his wife, Dr. Wright, she just passed not too long ago. She came to Dothan. She wrote a book called The Wright Man, the W-R-I-G-H-T man. But that museum is a fabulous museum. It's still very actively involved. I've spoken to them several times. And I have archives there also at the Wright Museum in Detroit.
For young African American men that don't have the leaders in their life like you had, what advice would you give them on defeating the odds?
Well, they have to be taught something. If they don't know nothing, they can't do nothing. I've taught African and African American history for many, many years. Black children, and all children, because I know the human family is monogenetic, and I can explain all of that. You know, if anybody want me to, I can explain you how it all happened. But the human family is monogenetic. We're all the same. We're all just humans. And we all came from Africa. That's where human life began, in Africa. Our children have to be taught. I'm talking white children too, Black children. We all have to be taught, because we're all the same humans. We just ended up in America. And we're not native to America, although we are native, because Africans went everywhere.
What else are you doing to make sure that our generation knows the importance of learning their history?
Well, I've organized classes here in Dothan. I've taught African American history here. But I think that, back to what we said early on, is if these Black children have no knowledge of themselves, know nothing about themselves, know nothing about why they are like they are, why they look like they look, and white kids too. I mean, they need to know something about themselves, because they don't know either. And we all need to know something about American history, because we don't know either. The Reconstruction. And that was a very critical time in American history. You know, you're talking about the thing that gave us the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment to the Constitution of the United States. You're talking about something that's very, very important in America. Most Americans don't have a clue, black or white. They don't know anything about that or what happened. The 13th Amendment freed us from slavery. The 14th Amendment made us citizens. And the 15th Amendment gave us the right to vote. 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment. Very important parts of the United States Constitution. And everybody uses them for their own purposes except us. You know, we don't even have the right to vote in many areas. Voter suppression is all over this country. Today, we could be a better nation if we adhered to the United States Constitution, especially the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment to the Constitution. So I think that's work that has to be done. I'm optimistic. So hope springs eternal, and I'm optimistic. I believe that we can all come together and make America and the world a better place for everyone to live.
After watching this film, we hope you have learned more about your history and choose to become an ally to your neighbor in the future.